A distress signal went out. Only humanity's Deathworlders responded. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, a vast, dark sea with only distant stars to light its expanse. On a small, nearly forgotten planet at the far edges of the galaxy, a signal broke the silence. It was weak at first, barely detectable, but its urgency could not be ignored. An alien colony, hidden among the rubble of what had once been a thriving settlement, sent out a desperate call for help. At first, it seemed like just another cry in the endless void, one more distress signal lost in the sea of communications that went unnoticed daily. The Galactic Council, with its high ideals and complex bureaucracy, usually took days to respond, and even then often did nothing. This time, it seemed no different. The signal flickered in the deep, awaiting an answer that never came. In the heart of the galaxy, where power and influence dictated the flow of decisions, no one had time to listen to the problems of a small alien colony on a backwater planet. The signal went unanswered, but someone heard it. Captain Vance stared at the flickering screen in front of him. The command console inside his small, rugged ship was simple, barely more than a few controls and readouts. His ship wasn't the most advanced, but it didn't need to be. It was fast, maneuverable, and lethal when needed. His crew, a group of humans from Earth who had earned their place in the galaxy's most dangerous corners, understood the meaning of survival. When Vance saw the distress signal, he didn't hesitate. It was what they did best, answering calls no one else would. The humans of Earth, known across the galaxy as the Deathworlders, had earned their name not just because of their home planet's brutal environment, but because of the iron will and blood that ran through their veins. To many species, Earth was a place of legends, a world where humans fought against impossible odds, where survival was a daily struggle, and where the strongest and most relentless thrived. Vance wasn't surprised to find the Galactic Council had ignored the call. To them, the small colony meant nothing. To humanity, it meant something different. This was a chance to prove that humans, no matter how small their numbers, could change the fate of an entire world if they had to. The crew of the Trident wasn't just on this mission out of a sense of duty. They were here because they had the skills, the heart, and the ferocity that no one else could match. The coordinates from the signal led them to a planet called Azoth. It was a barren world, a dry, lifeless rock with little more than dust and broken ruins to show for it. The colony, a mix of peaceful species from across the galaxy, had settled here many cycles ago, seeking refuge from the chaos of the outer territories. They had believed the planet would be a safe haven, a place where they could rebuild and create a new life. But in their peaceful existence, they had never prepared for what was coming. As they entered Azoth's atmosphere, Captain Vance could already see the signs of devastation. The skies were clouded with dark smoke, and in the distance they could make out the broken remains of what had once been a bustling city. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of movement, something large, something fast. "Captain, we're not alone," came the voice of LT, Annie, his second-in-command. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. The Deathworlders weren't easily rattled, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the horizon, was familiar. And it made everyone on board uneasy. "We expected that," Vance replied, his tone calm but sharp. He wasn't going to show fear, not now, not with so many lives hanging in the balance. "Prepare for a fast landing. We don't know what we're dealing with yet, but whatever it is, it's not friendly." The Trident descended toward the planet, and the closer they got to the surface, the clearer it became that the situation was far worse than they had imagined. The alien structures, built to withstand harsh environments, were crumbling, burnt from the inside out. The ground was littered with debris, and scorch marks ran across the landscape. Something had torn through this colony like a storm, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. "We're about to land," Vance said, giving the crew one last look before the descent began in earnest. He knew the risks, but this was what they had trained for. This was their purpose. The Trident touched down with a soft thud, the engines rumbling as they powered down. The crew stepped out into a land of ruins, the air thick with the smell of burning metal and dust. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft whisper of the wind. Vance's boots crunched on the broken ground as he surveyed the area. There were no signs of life, at least not in the usual sense. The colony's population, once numbered in the thousands, was now nowhere to be found. "We've got movement," LT Annie reported, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Something out there," Vance nodded. "Stick together. We're here to find survivors, not to play hero. But as the crew began their cautious trek toward the heart of the ruined colony, they quickly realized that there was no one left to save. The first sign of the true danger came when they crossed the remnants of what looked like a defense post. The barricades were torn apart, shredded like paper. Vance crouched down, examining the bloodstains smeared across the ground. "Whatever did this," he muttered under his breath, "it wasn't merciful." His crew gathered around him, ready for whatever came next. "We'll find out soon enough," Vance said, "but we're not backing down, not now." As they pressed forward, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive. Something was out there, something fast, something deadly, and they were getting closer to it. Then, without warning, the ground shook. A low, rumbling noise echoed through the ruins, followed by a high-pitched screech that made the hairs on the back of Vance's neck stand up. The sky above darkened, and from the shadows of the ruins, something emerged. It wasn't like anything the humans had seen before. The creature was a mix of technology and flesh, towering above them with sharp, jagged limbs that dripped with venom. Its eyes, glowing a faint green, locked onto them as it advanced with terrifying speed. "Captain, look out!" Annie shouted as she fired the first shot, her weapon hitting the creature's thick hide with a resounding thud. But the creature didn't slow down. Instead, it charged. The Deathworlders were quick to react, instinctively falling into formation as they unleashed a barrage of fire at the beast. But no matter how many shots hit, the creature kept coming, its eyes burning with an unholy fury. Vance raised his arm, signaling the crew to fall back. "It's not going to be enough," he muttered. "We need to find out what we're really dealing with here." As the team retreated, they knew one thing for certain: this was no ordinary rescue mission. They were facing an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But if there was one thing that the humans of Earth were known for, it was that, when no one else would respond, they always would. They would fight until the very end. And in the shadow of a dying colony, the Deathworlders prepared for a battle that would change the galaxy forever. The creature loomed over them, its jagged body twisting as it charged forward with terrifying speed. Captain Vance's instincts kicked in immediately, his mind already calculating their options. His crew scattered, each member taking up a position to cover each other. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath their boots seemed to tremble with each step the beast took. The creature was unlike anything Vance had ever seen. Its skin, a dark metallic surface that seemed almost organic, shimmered in the dim light of the ruined colony. Sharp claws extended from its limbs, scraping against the ground as it moved. But what was most unsettling were its eyes, glowing a sickly green, wide and unblinking. They locked onto Vance as though it recognized him as prey. "LT." Annie was the first to react, her pulse rifle aimed and ready. She squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of energy straight at the creature. The weapon fired with a crackling sound, and the beam hit the beast's side with a loud explosion. But the creature didn't slow down. Instead, it howled in anger, its mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth, dripping with a strange, black substance. "Not even a dent," Annie muttered under her breath, quickly reloading her weapon. "Keep moving," Vance barked, his voice low but firm. He knew that this wasn't going to be a simple fight. They needed to find out more about this creature if they were going to have any chance of stopping it. The team scattered into the ruins, ducking behind broken walls and abandoned structures for cover. The creature pursued them with a relentless fury, its claws scraping against metal and stone as it moved. Vance's heart raced as he calculated their next move. If the shots weren't working, then maybe they needed a different approach. "Set up a perimeter," Vance ordered, his voice steady despite the growing danger. "We can't outrun this thing. We have to hold it off until we learn more about what we're facing." The crew quickly obeyed, setting up defensive positions. Vance moved towards Annie, who was already scanning the creature's movements. They both knew that the odds weren't in their favor, but the Deathworlders had something that the creature didn't: experience. Vance took a deep breath. "Annie, get a reading on its weak points." "This thing has to have one." Annie nodded, her fingers flying over her control pad as she analyzed the creature's movements. "It's covered in armor, but it's fast. I can't get a precise shot. It's like it's built to survive anything we throw at it." "We'll find a way," Vance said, his voice firm. "We always do." Just as he spoke, the creature lunged at a nearby team member, Sergeant Kowalski, who had been firing steadily from behind a broken barricade. Kowalski managed to dive out of the way at the last second, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws. The beast's jaws snapped shut just inches from Kowalski's leg, the force of its bite sending a shockwave through the air. "Watch your six," Kowalski shouted, rolling to his feet and taking another shot at the creature. But the beast was already on the move again, darting towards a new target. Vance's mind raced. The creature wasn't just powerful, it was fast, intelligent, and relentless. It wasn't just a mindless beast. There was something more to it. It moved with purpose, tracking each of them as though it knew exactly who to target. "We need a plan," Vance said, his voice growing more urgent. "Annie, figure out how to stop this thing." "We don't have much time," Annie replied, sweat trickling down her face as she tried to get a lock on the creature. "There's something strange about its movements. It's like it's reacting to our energy sources. Every time we fire, it adapts and gets faster." Vance's eyes narrowed as he realized what that meant. "It learns." "Exactly," Annie confirmed. "It's a living weapon. We're not dealing with just some wild creature. We're dealing with something engineered to fight." Vance looked around at his team, knowing that they were facing something far beyond what they'd expected. But humans weren't known for backing down from a fight, no matter how hopeless it seemed. "Let's bait it," Vance said after a brief pause, formulating a plan. "If it adapts to energy, we need to give it something to focus on, something big. We'll use that distraction to get in close and disable it." "Sounds risky," Kowalski said, his eyes scanning the creature as it paced in front of them. "But it's the only shot we've got." "We don't have a choice," Vance replied. "Get ready." The team quickly set up the trap, using explosives to create a diversion. They would lure the creature toward a dead zone, where it would be forced to focus on a high-energy signal they had rigged, drawing it away from their positions. While the beast was distracted, Vance and the others would move in for a close-quarters strike. As they finished preparing the trap, Vance's communicator crackled to life. "Captain," came a voice, sharp with urgency, "we've got more readings. This creature isn't alone. There's a whole pack of them." Vance's blood ran cold. "How many?" "Too many to count," the voice replied. "It's like a swarm." He didn't have to hear more. "Everyone get to your positions," Vance ordered. "We're not alone out here. This is about to get a lot worse." The team quickly took their places as the trap was set. Vance felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. They'd come here to help, to save those who had sent the distress signal. But now, it seemed like they were the ones who needed saving. The ground shook again, this time with a low, rumbling noise that seemed to reverberate through the entire colony. From the shadows, more creatures began to emerge, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like hunting predators. The Deathworlders could hear the distant screeches as the pack moved closer, drawn to the energy they had set up as bait. "Now!" Vance shouted. The explosion echoed through the ruins, a deafening blast that sent a shockwave through the air. The creature, momentarily stunned, turned toward the explosion, its eyes wide with rage. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They opened fire, unloading everything they had into the creature's massive form. But the creature quickly adapted, its body shifting and moving faster than before, its jagged armor changing shape to deflect the blasts. It let out another chilling roar, charging directly at Vance and his crew. "Fall back!" Vance shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. They had triggered the trap, but it had only bought them a few seconds. The real danger was just beginning. And now they knew what they were up against. A relentless, adaptable enemy that wouldn't stop until they were all dead. Vance grabbed his rifle, the weight of the mission pressing on him. His team was outgunned, outnumbered, and facing an enemy they didn't fully understand. But they would not give up. They couldn't. The only question now was how long they could survive before they found a way to end this. The ground trembled again, louder this time. Vance and his team had barely managed to regroup after the initial attack, and the roar of the creature still echoed in their ears. It was hard to hear anything else over the deafening sound of the beast's growls, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. Vance crouched behind a broken pillar, his eyes scanning the area. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. The creature had gone silent for a moment, but the team knew it wasn't over. The pack was still out there, and with each passing minute the danger increased. "We need a plan, Captain," Annie said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She had already reloaded her rifle, her eyes never leaving the shadows. "I know," Vance replied, his gaze fixed on the darkened ruins ahead. "But we don't have much time. If we don't find a way to neutralize those creatures soon, we're not going to make it out of here alive. The team had done their best to set up a perimeter, but the creatures were intelligent. They had learned from the first encounter, adapting to the Deathworlders' tactics and becoming more unpredictable with every move. The creatures' strength and speed made them formidable, and their ability to withstand energy weapons was beyond anything Vance had faced before. The usual strategies that had worked on other alien threats were useless here. Vance's mind raced. They needed information, something to give them an advantage. If these creatures were as adaptive as they seemed, then there had to be a weakness, something hidden in their design or biology that could be exploited. The team moved cautiously through the ruins, trying to stay out of sight. The alien city, once filled with life and promise, was now a graveyard of shattered buildings and wreckage. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the air felt heavy, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Vance's thoughts kept drifting back to the signal they had received. Who had sent it? Why was the colony here in the first place? And why had they been left to die? These questions gnawed at him, but there was no time for answers now. The mission had changed. Now they were fighting for survival. "We need to find their nest," Vance said, finally breaking the silence. "If we can find where they're coming from, we might be able to end this." "How do you plan to do that?" Annie asked, her voice full of doubt but tinged with hope. "We draw them out," Vance said simply. "We make enough noise to get their attention, then we follow them back to their lair." Kowalski, who had been quietly checking his ammo, looked up. "It's risky, but it's the only chance we've got. We know they're not stupid, but they're also not invincible." Vance nodded. "Exactly, they're not gods, they're just weapons, and weapons can be broken." The team moved out, carefully making their way deeper into the city's heart. Vance could hear the distant screeches of the creatures as they communicated with each other. The sound sent a chill down his spine, but he ignored it. Fear had no place on the battlefield. "Keep your distance," Vance ordered. "Stay in the shadows, don't engage unless I say so." The crew split up, each member taking a different route through the maze of ruins. Vance and Annie moved together, their eyes constantly scanning for movement. The air was thick with tension as they crept closer to what was left of the colony's main square. Then they saw it. A flicker of movement caught Vance's eye. In the shadow of a half-collapsed building, one of the creatures was standing still, as if waiting. Its glowing green eyes were locked onto something, and for a moment it seemed almost intelligent. The creature's long claws scraped against the broken concrete as it shifted its weight, clearly alert but not yet aware of their presence. Vance motioned for Annie to follow him. They would need to get closer to draw the creature into the trap. They had only one shot at this. They moved carefully, their footsteps silent on the cracked ground. The creature remained motionless, its gaze never leaving the shadows where Vance and Annie hid. As they got closer, Vance could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. One wrong move and everything would fall apart. At the right moment, Vance reached for his detonator, activating the explosive charges they had set earlier. The sound of the blast was deafening, sending a shockwave through the air. The creature's head snapped toward the explosion, its eyes widening in fury. It shrieked, its entire body vibrating with rage. Vance didn't hesitate. He and Annie dashed toward the creature, using the distraction to get in close. The other members of the team, having heard the explosion, converged on the area, weapons ready. The creature let out another scream, more horrifying than the last, as it charged toward them with terrifying speed. But the team was ready. They opened fire, their weapons lighting up the night with a barrage of energy blasts. The creature roared, its body jerking as it took hit after hit. But it wasn't slowing down. It was adapting again, shifting its armor to deflect the shots. The Deathworlders had underestimated it. This creature was more than just a wild beast. It was a living weapon designed for one purpose, to kill. Vance shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Fall back, we need to get it into the open." Annie fired one last shot, hitting the creature in its exposed side. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it turned its attention to the team's position and lunged again, moving faster than they could react. Vance's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they couldn't keep this up. They were out of time. The creature was learning too fast, adapting too quickly. They needed a new plan, and fast. "Fall back to the trap," Vance yelled. "We need to lead it into the open." The team turned and sprinted, hoping to draw the creature away from the colony's ruins and into the open ground where they might have a chance to end it. The creature followed them relentlessly. its claws digging into the earth with every step. It was almost as if it were playing a game, toying with them as it closed the distance. But Vance had one more trick up his sleeve. He had seen something earlier, something that could help them win. The creature, as powerful as it was, still had limitations. It wasn't invincible. They led the creature into the open field, where the Deathworlders set their final trap. This time, instead of just energy weapons, Vance had placed several mines beneath the ground, hidden from view. The plan was simple: lure the creature into the area, then detonate the mines when it was close enough. As the creature charged, Vance signaled Annie, who hit the button on the detonator. The explosion that followed was enormous. The ground shook as the mines erupted in a series of deafening blasts, sending dust and debris flying in every direction. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the smoke and dust, the creature emerged. It was battered, its once pristine armor now torn and scorched. But it was still alive. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto Vance, and for the first time he saw fear in its expression. It wasn't invincible, it could be hurt. Vance raised his rifle, aiming for the creature's exposed throat. He squeezed the trigger, sending a powerful energy beam directly at the weak spot. The creature let out a final, terrible scream before it collapsed to the ground, its body twitching before going still. The Deathworlders stood panting, their bodies covered in sweat and dust, but they had done it. They had survived. They had defeated the creature, but Vance knew this was only the beginning. There were more out there. And the real enemy was still waiting to be discovered. The creature's body lay motionless on the ground, its once glowing eyes now dull and lifeless. The Deathworlders stood in a tense silence, their weapons still trained on the beast. The smell of burnt flesh and scorched earth filled the air. They had won this fight, but they all knew that the battle was far from over. The creature they had just slain was only one of many, and it had only been the beginning of their mission. Captain Vance stood still for a moment, his heart still pounding in his chest. The fight had been brutal, but they had managed to bring down the beast with a combination of strategy, firepower, and pure willpower. He turned to look at his team, all of them battered but alive. They were tough, hardened by the brutal conditions of their homeworld, Earth. If anyone could handle this, it was them. "Report," Vance said, his voice calm but urgent. Annie, his second-in-command, stepped forward. "We're alive, Captain, barely." "But we've got a bigger problem now." Vance raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem? We're not just dealing with wild animals here. These creatures," Annie gestured to the fallen beast, "they're engineered, someone made them." Vance frowned, his mind racing. "Who would create something like this?" "We need to find out," Annie replied. "And fast. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that this isn't some random attack. There's a pattern. This is an experiment, something far bigger than we can handle alone." Vance nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Then we find out who's behind it." The team moved quickly, checking their supplies and making sure they were ready for whatever came next. They couldn't afford to waste time. The other creatures were still out there, and their work was far from over. If these beasts were created, then there had to be someone, or something, controlling them. They set off again, moving through the ruins of the colony, careful not to make too much noise. The last thing they needed was another surprise attack. The city, once full of life and color, now felt like a ghost town. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of a collapsing building or the distant screech of the remaining creatures hunting in the dark. As they reached the outskirts of the colony, Vance saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A large structure, still mostly intact, stood in the distance. It was different from the rest of the colony, more advanced, more fortified. It was clearly important, and it was still operational. "This is it," Vance muttered under his breath. "This is where they've been coming from." Annie stepped up beside him, scanning the building with her rifle. "It looks like a research facility," she said. "This is where they were experimenting. It has to be." "Let's move," Vance ordered. The team quickly approached the facility, staying low and alert. As they neared the entrance, they saw the remains of several alien soldiers scattered across the ground. It was clear they had tried to fight back, but had been overrun. There was no sign of the survivors, and the doors to the facility were wide open, as if inviting them in. Vance held up a hand, signaling for the team to stop. "Be ready for anything. We don't know what's inside." With that, they moved inside, weapons raised. The interior of the facility was dark, the air thick with the smell of metal and decay. The walls were lined with strange, alien technology, some of it familiar, much of it not. There were data pads and holographic screens scattered throughout, and in the center of the room, a large chamber stretched out, its purpose unclear. Vance's eyes immediately went to a large console in the corner of the room. It seemed to be still functional. He motioned for Annie to come closer, and together they approached the terminal. It flickered to life as Annie pressed a few buttons, bringing up a series of encrypted files. "What's in there?" Vance asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Annie's fingers flew over the console. "It's a research log," she said, her brow furrowing. "They were experimenting with bioengineering, genetic manipulation, weaponized creatures. It's all here." Vance stepped closer. "Tell me what we're dealing with." Annie scrolled through the files quickly. This facility was part of an initiative by a race called the HFY. They were trying to create the perfect soldiers, biological weapons that could survive anywhere, adapt to any situation. They called it the X Project. But something went wrong. "What happened?" Vance asked, a sense of dread creeping up on him. "The creatures," Annie said, pausing, "they weren't supposed to be like this. They were designed to be controllable, intelligent, yes, but subservient to their creators. Instead, they turned on their creators. The Xthari were wiped out by their own creations. The creatures, they're free now, and they're still evolving." Vance's mind raced as the implications of this hit him. The creatures were more than just animals. They were weapons, created by a race that had long since fallen. And now they were out of control. "How do we stop them?" Kowalski asked, his voice heavy with worry. Annie took a deep breath. "The Xthari developed a fail-safe system, but it's buried deep within the facility. We need to access it before the creatures adapt further. If we don't shut it down, they'll keep coming, and soon the whole galaxy could be at risk." Vance nodded grimly. "Then we find it. Let's move." The team pushed forward deeper into the facility. The walls seemed to close in on them as they moved through the darkened corridors, their footsteps echoing off the metallic floors. The tension was unbearable, and Vance couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They reached a large, reinforced door at the far end of the facility. The door was sealed tight, but there was a keypad beside it. Annie immediately went to work, her fingers flying over the controls. It took a few moments, but soon the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark, sterile room. In the center of the room, a massive, complex machine stood. It looked like a cross between a control panel and a weapon, its surface covered in alien symbols that none of them could read. "This is it," Annie said, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "This is the fail-safe system." Vance stepped forward, his eyes scanning the device. "How do we activate it?" "I'm not sure," Annie replied, "but if we can shut it down, we'll stop the creatures from evolving. If we can't, they'll keep getting stronger." Vance didn't hesitate. "Do it." Annie worked quickly, pressing buttons and pulling levers. The room hummed with energy as the machine powered up, its systems coming to life. The walls around them seemed to vibrate as the machine began to whir and buzz, and Vance's heart began to race. They were running out of time. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut with a deafening sound. The team spun around, weapons raised, but there was no one there. A voice echoed through the room, cold and mechanical. "You shouldn't have come here." Vance's stomach tightened. The voice was not human. And it wasn't alien either. It was something more. Before anyone could react, the walls of the room began to shift, the panels sliding open to reveal dozens of the creatures, their glowing eyes flashing in the dark. They had found them. Vance raised his rifle. "Hold your ground," he shouted. The creatures began to charge. The creatures surged forward, their glowing eyes burning with an unholy rage. There were dozens of them, each one moving with terrifying speed, and they were closing in on the team. The room seemed to get smaller, the walls pressing in on them. Vance's heart raced, but he kept his focus. They had no choice now, they had to fight. "Stay tight," Vance shouted over the din of the creature's roars. His voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. "We hold this position, no matter what." The team immediately responded, falling into formation, their backs pressed against the cold, metal walls of the room. The creatures circled them, their eyes never leaving the humans as they growled and hissed, their massive claws scraping the floor. Vance knew they couldn't afford to let the creatures surround them. If they lost the high ground, they would be overwhelmed in minutes. He raised his rifle, quickly scanning for the nearest target. As one of the creatures lunged, Vance fired, hitting it square in the chest. The beast screeched, staggering back, but it didn't fall. Annie opened fire next, her pulse rifle sending precise shots into the nearest creature. It howled in pain, but continued to advance, the wound healing almost instantly as the creature's adaptive armor shifted to protect the damaged area. The Deathworlders' weapons weren't enough. These creatures had been engineered to survive anything, but the humans had to keep fighting. They couldn't let up. "We need to get to the control panel," Annie shouted, ducking behind a pillar as another creature charged. Vance's mind was racing. The fail-safe system had to be the key. If they could somehow activate it, they might be able to stop the creatures from evolving further, but getting to the control panel while under attack wasn't going to be easy. "We make a run for it," Vance ordered. "On my mark, we push through to the panel." The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had no choice now. They had to end this before the creatures became unstoppable. Vance took a deep breath and counted down. 3, 2, 1, go. He led the charge, sprinting toward the control panel with the rest of the team right behind him. The creatures shrieked in fury, but the humans didn't slow down. Bullets and energy blasts filled the air as the team opened fire, trying to keep the creatures at bay. The creatures dodged and retaliated, slashing and snapping at them with terrifying speed, but the Deathworlders were too fast, too skilled. Vance reached the control panel first, slamming his hand down on the console. The screen flickered, then went black. His heart skipped a beat, but then, to his relief, the lights on the panel began to glow again, a soft, green light pulsing rhythmically. It was working. "Get ready," Vance muttered, his fingers flying across the controls. He had no idea how to deactivate the system, but the Xthari's research logs had given him some clues. He had to be quick. Every second counted. Behind him, the team continued to hold off the creatures, their weapons firing steadily. But Vance could hear the creatures getting closer. They were relentless, moving faster, adapting to the humans' attacks. They knew that if they reached the control panel, the humans could stop them. The sound of clawed feet slamming against the floor grew louder, and Vance could feel the heat of the creature's breath on his neck. One of them lunged at him, its sharp claws scraping across his armor, but he twisted away just in time. He ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the attack, and then slammed his fist onto another part of the console. The lights on the panel flickered again, but nothing happened. "Damn it!" Vance muttered. He slammed his fist down again, frustration rising in his chest. If he couldn't figure this out, they were all going to die. "Captain," Annie shouted, "we don't have much time." Vance's mind raced, trying to remember the research log's details. Then it clicked. He was trying to shut down the system, but he needed to reverse the fail-safe, not disable it completely. He needed to activate it in reverse, activate the shutdown sequence. He quickly adjusted the settings, his hands moving faster than ever before. Come on," he muttered, his fingers flying over the console. Suddenly, the control panel beeped, and the entire room hummed with power. The lights in the room brightened, and a loud, mechanical whine filled the air. The creatures let out a collective screech as if they could feel the change. "Vance," Kowalski shouted, "get us out of here." But Vance didn't move. He knew they had seconds before the creatures attacked in full force. The control panel's lights pulsed, and a deep rumbling noise shook the walls. The fail-safe was in place. "We're almost there," Vance called out, his voice tight with determination. "Just hold them off for a few more seconds." The creatures were closing in on them fast now, but the Deathworlders held their ground. Annie, Kowalski, and the others fought with everything they had, their weapons blazing. The creatures were getting stronger, more resilient with every attack, but they weren't fast enough. The control panel beeped again, louder this time, and a deep, resonating voice echoed through the room. It wasn't a voice the humans recognized. It was cold, emotionless, and mechanical. "System shutdown complete. Fail-safe activated." The moment the voice stopped, the creatures froze in place, their bodies twitching erratically. The glowing light in their eyes flickered and dimmed, their claws stopped moving, and their jaws snapped shut, no longer snapping at the humans. They were paralyzed. The team stood in stunned silence, their weapons still raised but not firing. They didn't dare move until they were sure it was over. Vance took a deep breath and stepped away from the control panel. He wiped the sweat from his brow. "It's done," he said, his voice quiet but filled with relief. "We did it," Annie said, her voice barely above a whisper. But Vance knew that the victory wasn't complete. They had stopped the creatures from evolving further, but there was more to uncover. The Xthari, the ones who had created these beasts, were still out there somewhere, and their plans were far from over. "We need to get out of here," Kowalski said. "The job's done, but we're not safe yet." Vance nodded. "Agreed, let's move, but keep your eyes open." This isn't over. The team quickly began to retreat, making their way back through the facility. The creatures, now motionless and inactive, no longer posed a threat. But Vance's mind was still racing. Who had designed these creatures, and why had they been abandoned? There were still so many questions left unanswered. As they left the facility, the team paused for a moment, looking out over the ruined city of Azoth. It had been a long and dangerous mission, but they had succeeded. The creatures had been stopped, at least for now. But as Vance looked out over the desolate landscape, he knew that the galaxy was far from safe. There were always more enemies, more dangers, and more secrets hidden in the dark corners of space. And as long as humanity's Deathworlders were around, they would be ready to face whatever came next. They had proven that even against the greatest odds, they were more than capable of surviving.